Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kia ora, Bolt fam. It's the director. Chargers fans, today marks the day of the first episode of one of my favorite series to do every single season, and that is going to be our stats prediction videos. This means the season's getting close, Bolt fam, and the hype is starting to rise. Whether you're here for fantasy football, whether you're here because you're a diehard Chargers fan, this is going to be a good one. And I put a ton of work and effort into this series in terms of visual presentation, okay? So what's going to happen in today's video is that we're going to be taking a look at every single game on the Chargers schedule while also highlighting some of the players that Justin Herbert is going to have to worry about in terms of matchups. And again, we did this for every single team on the schedule from weeks 1 to week 18, so it should be a really good one, guys. Justin Herbert, we wanted to start with the man himself. He had an absolutely insane season last year, one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league in very many stats, while also breaking a ton of Chargers franchise records. Can he do it again? I just did a video a couple of days ago going over some of my light stat predictions. I decided to sit down and really give it some thought, go through every single game, every single opponent, and come to what I would call my official stance, my official conclusion on how I think Justin Herbert does in 2022. So question in the comments like we do in every single video, guys. We'll keep this one simple, okay? With Justin Herbert's stats last year, keep them in mind. 5,014 yards with 38 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. How do you think he does in 2022? Go ahead and post your stat predictions in the comments section below. This will be a fun one to come back to after the end of the year to see how we all did. Well, before we kick off, guys, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, the small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action. Your Justin Herbert 2022 stat prediction video. Oh, dudes, I love doing these videos. I love the speculation part of it, but I also love being able to witness what we saw from Justin last season and try and build on top of that because, again, this Chargers unit is completely different in terms of the roster, right? The defense can now keep up with the offense. The offense has seen some upgrades in terms of offensive line, tight end, and running back. It should all spell out for an even better season for Justin Herbert. So while keeping that in mind, let's jump right into our first matchup. Week 1 versus the Vegas Raiders. Now, you guys, you'd be crazy to think that the Chargers don't have this game circled on their calendars. It's underlined. They drew little skulls next to it with those little arrows going through it because they want their revenge. And I, as a Chargers fan, want very much so a same revenge because of what happened at the end of last season. The Chargers very, very close to making it into the playoffs, crazily enough, with the Raiders by tying that game, and it didn't happen. In the end, there are no ties in football, at least not on purpose, right? So we can't really be upset that, oh, we didn't get the tie. But at the same time, the Raiders definitely on our radar for that revenge game to kick off the season in September. So with that in mind, you guys will notice 3 players on the left side of the screen. In this one, we've got Max Crosby, Chandler Jones, and Rock Ya-Sin. I decided to put Sin in there because we kind of don't know what he's going to bring to the Raiders this season, as their secondary has been pretty meh the last couple of seasons. A couple of notable players, I could say, like maybe a little above average, Nate Hobbs, Trevon Moehrig. They're okay in some aspects, but for the most part, Rock Ya-Sin's the only guy where I'm like, maybe he could be the Raiders cornerback one at the start of the season. The 2 guys to really pay attention to on the defensive side of the ball for the Vegas Raiders are, of course, Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. I'm sure for like 7 or 8 days straight after that last game last season, we had nightmares together about Max Crosby absolutely destroying Storm Norton on that offensive line. And it's something to definitely keep an eye on, right? Justin Herbert versus the Raiders. The biggest thing that they got going for them on defense is that pass rush. They also added Chandler Jones via free agency, which he was one of the higher, I guess, coveted free agents going into free agency this season, and he decided to land with the Vegas Raiders. So long as the Chargers O-line can hold up at least okay versus two of the better pass rushers in the NFL, I think the Chargers have a really good chance at opening up the season at home with a nice dub versus the Vegas Raiders, and it could end up being a very fun one to witness. So you guys will notice here at the bottom of the screen now, we do have my prediction as to his stats that he puts up in this particular game. 41 attempts for 375 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. You guys will also notice in the smaller text at the bottom of the screen some of his rushing stats as well. Kind of wanted to keep track of his total yardage as we go along. But still, 41 pass attempts. That tells me that the Chargers definitely going to try and keep up score-wise with the Raiders this game, as the Raiders do possess a very nice offense as well. Derek Carr is okay, but we can't forget about Darren Waller, of course, Devontae Adams, and Josh Jacobs. This could cause the first game of the year to be very high-scoring, but one that's very fun for Chargers fans, hoping that we can come out on top. So versus the Vegas Raiders, Justin Herbert puts up some very nice and respectable numbers. Next up in week 2, the Chargers in back-to-back division games this time are going to be facing off against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, if I'm to be correct here, I do believe that this is one of the first like primetime games on Amazon Prime, so you guys will be able to catch that on Amazon Prime that Sunday. But I do believe maybe it's a Thursday night game. Let me know in the comment section below. Either way, week 2 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. This is going to be a very big one, especially in terms of the Chargers roster. It's very impressive the way that we've constructed it, but we want to make sure these pieces come together and work cohesively, right? And this is probably going to be the biggest test early in the season. I've mentioned this very many times throughout the course of the channel this season, that the first maybe half of the schedule doesn't look too bad, but there are a couple of games in there that we do have to worry about, and this is definitely the biggest one right here. The Kansas City Chiefs, this one being played at Arrowhead. Now, the 3 players I have listed on the left are Chris Jones, L'Jarius Sneed, and Juan Thornhill. You could maybe put Justin Reed in there. We just don't know how Reed is going to be fitting in with that new system in Kansas City. Either way, how I would describe the Kansas City defense is inconsistent, right? They've had some games, even last season, where they looked pretty good, but there are also really big stretches where they just looked downright awful. We don't know what version of the Chiefs that we're going to get, especially this early. There hasn't been, enough tape to accumulate what sort of defense they are in 2022. The big pieces that we can pay attention to, that we have experience against, that we know what we're up against, is Chris Jones, L'Jarius Sneed, and a couple other guys on defense that are somewhat notable as well. Chris Jones is going to be the biggest one. Chris Jones, however, does play as a pass rusher from the interior of that defensive line. And fortunately for the Chargers, that happens to be one of the biggest strengths on this offense as a whole. The interior of that offensive line looks really, really strong, featuring Zion Johnson, Corey Linsley, and Matt Filer. I think those guys together could really help slow down Chris Jones in this game, but it's definitely one to keep an eye out for. As for the coverage, L'Jarius Sneed, Juan Thornhill, I do know that they lost a corner. I think it was Shavarius Ward to free agency this season. It could leave it open a little bit to slicing and dicing by a Justin Herbert. And I do think that being the Chiefs and being the Chargers, both of these teams possess very high-powered offenses. I feel like it's really going to come down to the defense as to who gets the win. But as for Justin Herbert, I think he's more than capable of putting up some decent numbers in this game, even if they're not mind or eye-popping in this one, right? 38 attempts for 289 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Not a bad day for Justin Herbert, who also puts up 28 yards on the ground. Now, keep this in mind, guys, while we're going through this video. Please feel free to write down the names of the teams and give me your individual predictions as well. If not, please definitely leave at least your season predictions in the comment section below. With that, let's move on to week 3 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the Jaguars, to me, I think they might be a sneaky team this year, not in terms of their, win and loss record, but more so they do have some nice pieces on defense and on offense. Of course, they did overspend on a couple of players here and there, but they did improve overall. This also being Trevor Lawrence's second season, he might be more capable to put up points than he did in his rookie year. I don't know if I'm as confident as I would have been last season in going up against a Jacksonville team. They also picked up, I believe, Utah linebacker Devin Lloyd out of the draft this season, who should be an immediate contributor, especially moving in here to week 3. But we also got to watch out about standouts Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker, and Shaquille Griffin. This might be a little bit lower scoring than predicted, and maybe in terms of Justin Herbert, less production than we might expect. I've got Justin Herbert in this matchup with 33 attempts, 236 yards, and 2 touchdowns, while also adding a touchdown on the ground, be it with only 9 yards. Still pretty respectable, but you would hope for a bigger game, at least above 300 yards for Justin Herbert versus a team like Jacksonville. I just got a sneaky feeling that Jacksonville's defense is going to be putting up a good fight all season long with the additions that they made this offseason. Next up, week 4. You guys remember we talked about revenge games, talking with the Vegas Raiders earlier in the video? Well, here's another one. And here's another one that in some ways, and I hate to say it because this is not the way you want to think when going into, such a tough division. In some ways, this game I want to stomp even more than versus the first game versus the Raiders, which is kind of crazy. Maybe that's a wrong opinion, but at the same time, the Houston Texans last year was definitely a blow, and it was a low blow. It was definitely one that a lot of us went in, maybe a little bit cocky, of course, myself included. The Texans, one of the worst run organizations in the NFL. They were not putting up much of a fight last year, and they came in with the Chargers, and you guys know the rest. The rest is history. That was not a fun experience for Chargers fans last year, and this is a chance for us to come in here and right some wrongs. I still do not believe that the Texans are a very strong organization, nor are they a strong team at the moment. I do feel like they're adding some good pieces. One of them at the left side of the screen, you'll notice, is Derek Stingley Jr. Very nice add. I think they also got Kenyon Green, offensive lineman, early in the draft last year too. So they're starting to get better, but at the same time, it's a very, very incomplete team, and it's one that I hope the Chargers go out there and really make a statement that, hey, man, last year, that was an anomaly. This season, things are different. The Chargers are the supercharged Chargers, and we're going to go in there and make a statement in terms of dominancy. So I got Justin Herbert in this one with 37 attempts, 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. And he does add another rushing touchdown on the ground with 34 additional yards gained on the ground as well. So a pretty big day for Justin Herbert. Their defense has some pieces. Again, Jonathan Greenard was okay. Camus Grigor-Hill was okay. I think Greenard actually stood out as a pretty good player last year, but outside of that, they don't have much out there in Houston. So I do believe Justin Herbert has himself a very nice day versus the Texans in week 4. Next up, another big game from last season, one that honestly caught a lot of us off guard. I knew that it was going to be difficult given the Chargers' pretty blatant weaknesses at this point of the season because of this team's running attack, but we had no idea what kind of show we were about to witness versus the Cleveland Browns in 2021. Wow, what a game. I think the final score was something like Chargers 47 to the Browns like 43 or 42, something like that. Something ridiculous. One of the highest scoring games of the season last year. And it's because the Cleveland Browns, like I said, one of the best running attacks in the NFL. And they might return to that form this season as they're not too sure who's going to be quarterbacking in 2022. I got my opinions in that entire situation, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut because those opinions are pretty strong. Either way, who is Justin Herbert going up against in week 5? Myles Garrett, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome. You could maybe put Greedy Williams or another DB in there as John Johnson III. They got a pretty strong secondary, and they have a very lethal pass rushing unit as well, because we can't forget about Jadeveon Clowney, who did return to Cleveland this year too. This is a pretty strong defense, and despite that, last year they looked pretty similar. Maybe Denzel Ward was out at this point. The Chargers still put up a ton of points. Vice versa, the Chargers defense, which we all know had a lot of problems holding down against the run, did give up a lot of points too. In this matchup, I think we could see something kind of similar, but maybe more with the Chargers having a better capability of slowing down Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Either way, this should be an interesting one to watch for Justin Herbert. It's a very strong defense that they're going up against, and it's one that I hope Justin Herbert has a good day against, and that's exactly what I gave him in this prediction. 43 attempts for 336 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Again, it kind of feels like in my mind when putting together this prediction is that the Browns are going to score, right? I think it's obvious they're going to score at least once or twice with Nick Chubb, and it's probably going to come up to Justin Herbert and the air game to catch up via points. But either way, it'll be nice to go up against Cleveland with a much better run defense than we did last year. Next up in Week 6, the Chargers taking on their third division rival of the season, this time with the Denver Broncos. This is going to be one of those games that people tune in very anticipant of what they're about to witness. And it's one that by this point of the season, the Chargers should have a better understanding of what they're dealing with. Because as of right now, the Denver Broncos are kind of a wild card team to me. They could be very dominant under Russell Wilson if he can return to form, move on from his last season, which honestly was probably the worst season of his career. Or this team could possibly be mediocre again. If Russell Wilson can't, acclimate to the Denver Broncos, both literally and figuratively, he's going to Mile High Stadium, then maybe they still continue to see struggles even into Week 6. Either way, this will be a pretty high-powered, matchup that a lot of people might be pretty excited to see because the Chargers are definitely going to be turning some heads by this point in the season. Now, Justin Herbert needs to worry about this Denver defense that has been pretty consistent and very good for very many years now. This team now features Bradley Chubb, Patrick Surtain II, and Justin Simmons. I feel like a lot of people overlook Justin Simmons lately. No, dude. Justin Simmons is still a very good player, and it's one that the Chargers got to pay attention to. Now, very similar to the Browns, I feel like the Broncos do possess a very nice pass rush. They also have Randy Gregory in there, as well as a very nice secondary. Of course, they got Patrick Surtain, Justin Simmons, a couple other guys in there that are very nice in coverage. It's going to be a big test. And on top of that, you got to go ahead and add that Justin Herbert will be playing in a division game. Now, again, this team looks a lot different. I feel like versus the Broncos in particular, the Chargers might find a lot of success in targeting their tight ends. And that might be where we find a lot of yardage for Justin Herbert through the air. So in this one, I'm going to give him a pretty decent performance. 34 attempts for 258 yards, 3 touchdowns, but yes, an interception. I think Patrick Surtain is definitely growing into one of the better cornerbacks in the league. It's going to be one to watch out for if your name is Justin Herbert or any quarterback in the NFL facing Denver this season. Next up, moving into Week 7, the Chargers will be facing up against Russell Wilson's former team in the Seattle Seahawks. Man, dudes, it kind of gives you a perspective of time, right? It doesn't feel like too long ago that the Legion of Boom was kind of in their heyday, and all of a sudden this team has absolutely collapsed. It's going to take a while for them to rebuild after losing Russell Wilson and honestly most of the Legion, if not all of the Legion of Boom members. I think Bobby Wagner may have been the last one. Either way, who does Justin Herbert have to worry about in Week 7? Well, you got Jamal Adams, one of the best safeties in the league. For a while, there was a debate whether Jamal Adams or Derwin James has been the best. I think Derwin James has definitely taken that title, but that doesn't mean Jamal Adams is a pushover. The dude's a very good football player. They also have linebacker Jordan Brooks and brand new edge rusher in Uchenna Nwosu. Now, Nwosu, again, is kind of one of those guys that we know. We understand. We've seen him completely destroy games in the past. The only issue with Nwosu is that he isn't the most consistent player. Either way, you have to really pay attention to his production in Seattle by this point in the season because he might fit in that system very well and start to pop off and show a lot of us what we've seen in him in terms of potential. This is the Seattle Seahawks, though, guys. I'm trying not to get too carried away because, yes, they are a professional NFL football team. We can't take anybody for lightly or for granted. But this is a Drew Lock-led offense. I don't know if they're going to be, on the hunt to get another quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo before the season begins. That would change this prediction maybe a little bit. But I think the Chargers would have a pretty good handle on this particular opponent. And it's one that, as good as some of their defensive pieces can be, I don't think they have a full enough unit to contain a guy like Justin Herbert. We're talking about a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, and that's putting it lightly. So I'm going to give Justin another very good game in this one. 39 attempts for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns, while also adding 37 yards on the ground. It'll be one of those good games for Justin Herbert. Next up in Week 8, this is the Chargers bye week in 2022. The Chargers will be resting up, reloading, coming back into Week 9 to face against the Atlanta Falcons. Now the Falcons, dude, this team, talk about in a downward spiral, right? I think, what did they do? They went out after Deshaun Watson, which, again, I really don't agree with. But they did it anyway. And what did this do? This pushed Matt Ryan out of Atlanta, forcing them to trade him away and only getting, like a third-round pick back. Very, very bad call there. On top of that, they've lost Calvin Ridley. It's been a very up and down couple of years since losing the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots for the Falcons. But they do have some nice pieces on that team. Offensively, they have Marcus Mariota throwing the ball. It'll be another repeat of the Duck Bowl. You guys remember when Derek Carr was out and Marcus Mariota played against us with the Raiders? That was kind of cool, seeing the two, Oregon legends going head-to-head. They're going to do it again this season here in Week 9. They also have Kyle Pitts on offense and another couple of decent weapons, but nothing too crazy. On defense, however, there are a couple of bigger names that I think Justin Herbert needs to avoid. AJ Terrell, to me, is definitely one of those underrated cornerbacks in the league right now. He very well turn out to be one of the better cornerbacks in the league in the next couple of seasons. He might already be. He's a very good DB, and he needs to make sure to be avoided. You also have Grady Jarrett, who I talked a lot about the Chargers trying to trade for last season. I think very highly of him. I think he's a great defensive lineman, good at generating pressure in the middle as well as stopping the run. And then, of course, Deion Jones, the ball-hawking inside linebacker, patrolling the middle of the field. Again, if I'm the Chargers, I'm targeting the outside this game. You can test Deion Jones if you feel confident in your guys like Gerald Everett and Donald Parham, but I'm targeting the outside, opposite of AJ Terrell. So in this one, I got Justin Herbert putting up 38 attempts for 318 yards and 3 touchdowns. Very strong back-to-back weeks for Justin Herbert, and putting up, honestly, a very impressive season at this point of the year. But we got to remember, guys, I keep alluding to this all season, the first stretch of the schedule looks pretty good, right? It's going to give the Chargers a nice runway to gain some momentum. It's going to take a left turn here in a little bit where things might get a little sketchier, and it might start here in Week 10 versus the San Francisco 49ers, who do feature the brother of the greatest football player of all time, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, who in my opinion might be one of the best, if not the best, linebacker in the league right now. I think that dude is severely overlooked. And now Charvarius Ward joining that secondary. They have a couple other guys in that secondary too, but I wanted to highlight the addition as well. San Francisco 49ers. We know this team is good defensively. It kind of reminds me of, honestly, the Broncos of the NFC. They've got a really good defense, but have kind of been working to figure out that quarterback situation for very many years. This could kind of be a similar situation to Denver, where maybe they do have their answer. Jimmy Garoppolo has been a serviceable, we'll say, I don't know, game manager when it comes to the quarterback position, but I think Trey Lance, if I were spitballing here, I think Trey Lance takes a step forward this season. I think he starts to really show what people had, put faith in him during the draft a couple of years ago. And that will keep things interesting on offense in terms of him and Deebo Samuel. They got 600 different running backs, and of course George Kittle. That should keep the score at least not super safe for the Chargers defense. As for the Niners defense, we know they're very good. They've got really good coverage DBs. They've got really good, pass rushers. I didn't even mention the interior of their defensive line with Armstead and Kinlaw. Very, very nice unit out there in San Francisco. So unfortunately, and we're going to see something like this every single season, Justin Herbert can have bad days too. It's not going to be his best game of the season at all. I have him there for 34 attempts, 213 yards, 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions. I think that pass rush is going to cause the Chargers a bit of a headache in terms of keeping Justin Herbert completely protected, and he might throw a couple out there that he might regret. Even that being the case, though, I think Justin Herbert and the Chargers find themselves bouncing back sooner than later. But the San Francisco 49ers defense, not one to mess around with. Next up, Week 11. As we get closer to the end of this video, we are back with the Kansas City Chiefs. We won't spend too long on this one, other than how things have maybe shaped out at this point of the season, right? We're worrying about the same people: Chris Jones, Jarius Sneed, Juan Thornhill, etc., etc. But at this point of the year, we will have gotten a very nice sample size of what this version of the Kansas City Chiefs look like. Is their defense, any better than it was last season, or have we found some flaws? Maybe, in dicing up their secondary, maybe in terms of running the ball, maybe they find a weakness there as well. It'll be a little bit easier for the Chargers to pinpoint how to attack them at this point of the season, but vice versa. The Kansas City Chiefs will have the same opportunity. So it's going to be very interesting. I think if I'm a Chargers fan hoping that they take over the AFC West sooner than later, if I could make one wish this season, it's that the Chargers do sweep the Chiefs. And again, at this point, they might be the same old Chiefs. That's not going to happen. Maybe we're lucky to get one win, but there's also a very real possibility that after losing Tyreek Hill and Honey Badger and all these other pieces, the Chargers do have their chance at sweeping the Chiefs in Week 11. And that would be a very big one. That would be a very significant game if the Chargers find themselves in that position. And also, of course, we want to give the stats in this one. This one being played at SoFi Stadium. I think it's going to be a very fun one to witness. 44 attempts, 347 through the air, 4 touchdowns, and an interception while adding 17 on the ground. I think it'll be one of the funner ones of the season in terms of division rivals. Next up in Week 12 versus the Arizona Cardinals. This is also a very weird one for me because, again, we don't know what's going to happen. Kyler Murray's kind of been up and down in his commitment to Arizona. We know that the DeAndre Hopkins situation is not really going to affect us. He will play in Week 12 as far as we know, but is he going to need to have some catching up? What's the offense going to be looking like? There's a lot of things to look for, right? J.J. Watt being one of them. As we list the 3 players on the side, J.J. Watt, Isaiah Simmons, who I think is going to have a very solid season at the linebacker safety hybrid position, and Budda Baker. This is why I think the Cardinals might be a little tougher than we think, is because of the covers they're going to have in the middle of the field with these interchangeable safeties. They also have another one back there I forget the name of, but Budda Baker and Isaiah Simmons, very lethal. They've also got J.J. Watt, who I think was injured most of the season last year. If he's healthy this year, dude, that's one to watch out for too. But it also really depends on how the Cardinals offense operates. They're going to be very difficult to contain as they do have a very mobile quarterback as well as a very fast weapon in Marquise Brown. If the Chargers have a problem, containing a mobile quarterback and that kind of speed, we could be looking at a Chargers team trying to catch up through the game. So I'm going to give the Los Angeles Chargers and Justin Herbert in this one a pretty decent attempt here at 36 attempts, 244 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. But this is one where I do think the Chargers need to get their ground game involved just a little bit more, as I do think their coverage is pretty decent out there in Arizona. Next up, the Chargers facing another division opponent, this time the Vegas Raiders in their second matchup. Again, won't spend too long on this one. Max Crosby, Chandler Jones, Rocky Ya-Sin. This is the point of the season again. Like I mentioned with these Kansas City Chiefs, we're going to start to see some weaknesses. And in terms of the Vegas Raiders, it really does feel like they've left themselves open to some serious Achilles heel situations even before this point of the season. That offensive line, one of the worst in the NFL. Their secondary, it could be okay, but I would say it's below average. I don't know, dudes. It just feels like at this point of the year, the Raiders, if they're good, they will have proved it by now. But if I were a betting man, I feel like the Raiders are probably going to be struggling to keep up with the rest of the AFC West by this point, and the Chargers should be able to pinpoint a nice weakness to take them down, hopefully sweeping them this season. So I'm going to give Justin Herbert a very nice day. This one played out in Vegas. 43 attempts for 329 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and another 33 yards on the ground. Very, very nice game for Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Next up, we have another tricky opponent that maybe some people would underestimate a little bit just because they are the Miami Dolphins. It's the Tua team. They have made a lot of significant upgrades this offseason, though, I will say. Now they've got the dynamic duo of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. It's too bad that Tua can't really throw, further than 15 yards very consistently and not putting too much air underneath the ball. It's going to be interesting to see how that offense unfolds. But this defense, for the most part, has remained pretty consistent in my mind. And I do believe that the Miami Dolphins defense is one to watch out for. Xavier Howard, who put up double-digit interceptions just a few seasons ago, is a ball hawk. Byron Jones, a very good cornerback in the league. This makes for a very deadly duo. And then on top of that, you got guys like Emmanuel Ogbah. They have another pass rusher I can't put my finger on right now, but a very good pass rushing unit. So this is one where I think the Chargers definitely maybe don't have like the best game offensively. It really is going to come down to the Chargers' ability on defense to really hold them out, and I do think that the Chargers are capable of that, but I still do have Justin Herbert putting up an okay day, kind of similar to that Niners day, because I do believe that the Dolphins defense is very good and underrated, and that's just 3 players. They have a couple other that I do think are very notable as well. I got Justin Herbert in this one, 36 attempts, 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception, but he does score on the ground as well for a grand total of 3 touchdowns in this game, while also adding 20 yards on the ground as well. So not a bad performance. It's one that I do think can carry out a win via Justin Herbert's effort, but it's really going to depend on how the Chargers defense can hold down those speedsters, and fortunately Tua Tagovailoa. Next up, week 15, as we draw closer to the end of this video, the Chargers versus the Tennessee Titans. This one is so weird to me, dudes, because the Titans, in my opinion, were so close, right? Last season, so close on the back of Derrick Henry from really making a Super Bowl push, and they just collapsed. I figured that this offseason would be one of those offseasons where they're like, man, it's time. We're going all in. Very similar to what the Chargers did. They really didn't do much, right? Other than trading away their best wide receiver in A.J. Brown. But that's not something that the Chargers have to worry too much about in terms of Justin Herbert. They will have to keep up offensively. Derrick Henry's going to be running the show there. The Chargers, at this point in the season, I hope, are very well prepared to stop the run, because we're about to go up against some of the best running backs in the league. Either way, Justin Herbert, he needs to focus on guys like Harold Landry, Kevin Byard, and Caleb Farley. They do have some other really nice pieces on that defense, but maybe not as good as last season. Either way, Harold Landry, one of those underrated guys in the league, he's very good. Kevin Byard, probably one of the best safeties in the league. And then Caleb Farley, who I do believe was injured last season, might come in and show the league that he's one of the better shutdown corners in the NFL. Who knows? Who knows? He's got the size, he's got the speed. He just has to prove it here by week 15 versus the Chargers. I think this is going to be one that's very interesting for Justin Herbert in particular. Again, it really depends on how the Chargers' run defense holds up against Derrick Henry. But because of it being Derrick Henry specifically, I think that the Titans are capable of putting up a decent amount of points, which again will force Justin Herbert into the limelight to try and take away that lead. I got him here for 39 attempts, 314 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Not a bad day for Justin Herbert at all. Any day over 300 yards is a win in my book, especially there with 3 touchdowns. Next up here in week 16, as we get closer to the end of the prediction video, we've got the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this is a team that I'm honestly a little bit worried about, because they could really pop off in any given year if they get themselves a nice quarterback. Again, another team that's kind of following the archetype of the San Francisco 49ers and the Denver Broncos. They got a really nice defense. Darius Leonard, Yannick Ngakoue, and the newly added Stephon Gilmore. Those are pretty lethal combinations of players, not to mention the other guys that they've got in the secondary. Their offense is the biggest reason why I think they're going to take a big step forward this year, while adding a quarterback, Matt Ryan, in terms of a trade from the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Matt Ryan, he does remind me a little bit of what Phillip Rivers offered them in his twilight years in Indianapolis as well. And they did make it to the playoffs. I remember cheering for them with you guys on a live Sunday experience, and it really was something that teams couldn't take for granted. But the biggest reason why we have to be at least a bit prepared to face the Indianapolis Colts and their defense is also what they bring in terms of their running attack. Jonathan Taylor, I think he was the #1 running back last season. They might be able to put some points just on the ground alone, not to mention the Michael Pittman and, of course, Matt Ryan, et cetera, on that offense. It's one that, again, I'm not quite confident about, but I do think the Chargers can handle. Still, I think Justin Herbert puts up a decent day against them. 38 attempts for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, while adding another 11 yards and another touchdown on the ground versus the Indianapolis Colts. Week 16 is going to be very interesting, especially once we understand where we're at that point of the season. Are we definitely in the running for, the playoffs, maybe taking the AFC West? That could turn out to be a very, very big game. Now, speaking of big games, I've got this game highlighted on my calendar. I've got it, circled and underlined. This is probably going to be the biggest game of the Chargers for the Chargers this season, and it's one that I think is going to turn the heads of a lot of NFL fans, regardless of fandom. The Los Angeles Chargers versus the Los Angeles Rams. Both of these teams have been highly touted as some of the best rosters in the NFL. The Rams have been pretty loaded for several seasons now. They had, Von Miller and several other guys in seasons past. They did just add Bobby Wagner and I think, Allen Robinson on offense. They're still looking pretty deadly. And that's not to mention Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, probably the two best players at their positions in the NFL. That's pretty insane. The biggest key to the Chargers hopefully taking down the Rams in SoFi this season is shutting down Aaron Donald. I believe that Justin Herbert can keep up with the high-powered offense of the Rams featuring, Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, etc., etc. But my goodness, dudes, Aaron Donald, he's a game wrecker, and the Chargers are going to have to be prepared to throw whatever they can at him to slow him down. Then, of course, you've got Jalen Ramsey, of which I'm hoping, Keenan Allen can go toe-to-toe with and at least put up some decent numbers, but you're really going to have to count on your other weapons, like let's say your tight end Gerald Everett, your running back Austin Eckler, or Mike Williams on the opposite side of Keenan Allen in order to put up some pretty good numbers through the air. So this is one that I'm very excited to witness, one that I'm really hopeful the Chargers can win. But for Justin Herbert himself, this may reflect as to how crazy I think this game is going to be. 47 attempts by Justin Herbert, the most passing attempts I've got written down for him this season, as well as the most yards. 406 yards by Justin Herbert. If the Chargers lose this game, it won't be for a lack of effort by Justin Herbert. I also have him putting down 4 touchdowns and unfortunately 2 interceptions. I really had to take into account the games that really featured some of the best pass rushers and cornerbacks. This is the best one on our schedule, and unfortunately, I do have him putting up 2 interceptions in this one as well. But still, outside of that, an extremely impressive stat line for Justin Herbert in Week 17 versus the Rams, and it's one I'm kind of bullish on because, again, a lot of people will say, no way you're putting up those kinds of numbers versus the Rams defense. I beg to differ. I think the environment, the story, the players themselves, both of the rosters are going to put up for one of the better games that out of all the games next season we're going to see in 2022. And then finally, Week 18 versus the Denver Broncos. Of course, this could be one of those games. If the Chargers have clinched the division, which, let's be honest, they probably haven't, then we're probably not going to even see Justin Herbert in this game. I do think that it's going to come down to the wire and that Justin Herbert's going to have to play his heart out in this one. Again, we know what we're dealing with in terms of the Denver Broncos, but it's one, again, that I think the Chargers just need to get in there, grab the win, pull their starters, and look on maybe hopefully to the playoffs. So in this one, I've got Justin Herbert putting up some decent numbers, 298 yards, 2 touchdowns. I'm hoping that the run game gets involved quite a bit in this one, but pretty decent stats, getting close to 300 yards plus the 2 scores. Now, when you take into account all of the games that we've put together, what are you guys' feelings as of right now, right? How do you feel about the stats? Do you think this can maybe overtake last season? Do you think that it's the big leap that we're hoping to see to hope that Justin Herbert takes home the MVP award this year? It might be. It might be. And it's actually not too far-fetched to think that Justin Herbert takes this leap in our season total. 658 attempts for 5,185 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. That's pretty dang good, dudes. That's like Patrick Mahomes good of the past 3 or 4 seasons. Hopefully, maybe we do see, an opportunity to get close to 50 touchdowns, but still 44 touchdowns with another over 5,000 yard season is pretty big. But one of the things I wanted to highlight, and one thing that's very important to watch as we, see Justin Herbert progress in his career, is that interception number come down. Going from 15 to 10 this season, especially with how many attempts that he's got, very, very nice to see. I also tacked on the 62 carries for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. This, to me, is definitely worthy of at least being a huge part of the conversation for season MVP. So you guys let me know in the comments section below. These are my stat predictions for Justin Herbert, and it's one that I think is not too far off the bill in terms of realism and what to expect. Of course, you never know what could happen. Knocking on wood, we don't want to, jinx nothing, but with what Justin Herbert's shown us, whenever there's doubt, he proves them wrong. And I do think Herbert's in for a fantastic season. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Look forward to the next prediction video. This will be coming out at least weekly for the next 5 weeks. I have a whole bunch of players that I want to feature. Some of these videos, including more than one player, it should be a good time. But we wanted to start with the GOAT himself, number 10, Justin Herbert. Also, let me know in the comment section your predictions for Justin Herbert's status this season. It should be a very good one, a very fun one where he's finally going to see some help from that defense. Well, again, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. Hit us up with a like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Bye.